Welcome to Aditya Birla Group, Working Across Generations Virtual Summit 2023. We have with us now Dr. Adil Malia, who's also been a mentor to me personally in my journey when I joined the corporate and continues to be so, and who I can safely say is a wealth of knowledge across many fields, and especially in the fields that are pertaining to the context we are here for today. Adil is an HR leader. He's also a businessman. He's an entrepreneur, and he has much to share. So without much ado, Adil, welcome to our summit, and thank you for making the time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vinny, for giving me such a wonderful introduction.
So Adil, do you think conflict in multi-generational workforce is more than it would be in a more homogeneous workforce with people from the same generation? And if so, then in what areas?
So let me once again explain to you, as we were chatting last week, that when we talk about generational behaviors, so what are these generational behaviors influenced by? Because each generation's behavior is influenced by several factors. And when these factors are different between different generations, naturally the conflict is inbuilt into the working together of an organization with multi-generations. So number one is that the generational behavior is influenced at any point of time by 6 factors. One is the prevailing knowledge. Number 2, the character. Number 3, the value systems prescribed and subscribed by the people in their generation. Number 4 are the belief systems and the mind models that are prevailing at a point of time. And the technologies that drive these behaviors collectively are the 6 factors which at any point of time influence the behaviors of people within one generation. Now, this being different for different generations, naturally, when put together, these factors tend to conflict to the extent that they are different, and they gel to the extent that they are similar. Now, over a period of time, what we have been seeing in organizational sociology and culture is that at one point of time in the good old days, the cultural cohorts of up to 20 years would tend to reflect a huge amount of commonality in these factors. Versus now, over a period of time, these cohorts have been shrinking. So where once upon a time it was 20 years as a generation, now it then became 10 to 20 years as a generation, then it became 7 to 10 years as a generation, then it became 5 to 7 years as a generation. And currently in the post-COVID domain and era, we are finding that between 3 to 5 years is becoming a generation by itself. And therefore, the 6 cohorts tend to conflict when they are put together to work on a common objective. Thus, the conflict is bound to happen. Now, to answer the second part of your question, it's very natural that narrower the bridge between the cohorts working into the organization of generations, lesser the conflicts because there is a higher element of similarity and dissonance is therefore reduced.
So then how to best avoid it proactively?
Well, number one is to realize that these cohorts are going to be creating a certain behavioral pattern which is different and leading to a conflict. So number one is a realization. Number 2 is acknowledgement of that reality. Number 3 is understanding what causes that. Number 4, building the empathy around it. And number 5 is creating programmed interventions to create a higher element of appreciation, so that whenever you do migration of cultures working together, they are able to understand why certain people working along with them on a project of a different generation are behaving in a different pattern. Why do older employees tend to need a break to go to bank and withdraw money versus the younger generation does not need that break? So for them to be able to appreciate that intervention you cannot leave it to the forces of nature for this appreciation to happen. In an organizational reality where certain large organizational behaviors are involved and multicultural multi-generational people are working, then you need to have programmed appreciation interventions so that structurally both the groups tend to appreciate each other.
I think that's fantastic. Like there's already so much that one could work with in this. Now, in your role as a business and leadership consultant, now that you're working with so many other companies also, apart from the leadership roles that you've essayed in the past, what are the most common challenges that you see these intergenerational groups are experiencing with each other?
How motivational and the drive factors. What motivates one group of people, and I'll give you one example at a point of time. What drives one set of people does not necessarily drive or motivate the other set of people working in the same organization. The concept of money, the purpose of life, which are the larger driving factors, tend to be majorly different. Say, for example, the purpose of life, or let me give you a much more smaller example, and then if you need, I'll give you a higher example. Say, for example, the entire compensation and rewards model that operated in organizations at a point of time in the older generations was much more about first comes work, you work for several years, you earn your rewards, and then you spend it. That model is now totally different, versus the people want to take loans, start spending, and then work their life to pay for it. So do you realize that was the first part of it, which the earlier generation used to work, earn the money, then save the money, and then decide how they wanted to spend? Contrarian, where you want right now. So early gratification model is the model that drives the behavior of the Z generations. Delayed gratification drives the behaviors of the X and the Y generations of people. Likewise, there are differences, but this is one of the most. And the work ethics, behaviors, purposes. So say, for example, the older generation or the X or the Y generations would believe that the purpose of working in an organization was to fulfill the expectation of their boss and get his acknowledgement. There was no question of work-life balance. Versus the Z generation says the purpose is to create happiness for myself. And if, by the way, my boss is happy whilst I'm creating happiness for myself, good luck to him, because I am working in my organization to create my happiness. So do you see the differences? Now, when these generations work together, it is bound to be creating a conflict situation.
Definitely, and that kind of speaks of where the undercurrents would lie. So, which stereotypical behavioral traits that
Now,
are common?
can you imagine? Sorry. So I'm going to disturb your thought by asking one more situation. So say, look for an example. If you have a boss who's an X generation and an employee who's a Z generation, and he is working for his happiness, versus the boss is expecting the fulfillment of the purpose of the organization, bosses respect and happiness, and in that situation, they're working together. What is the conflict you're going to see?
Yeah, that's definitely. So I'd literally have to split myself into two kinds of people, right? So addressing
Right.
what would drive the motivations of somebody who sees the larger fulfillment in an organizational purpose. And I'd have to motivate, obviously, a subordinate with what motivates that person. So I'll have to find the business case or the work case for him by showing how it can drive happiness for himself. And very interesting. Yeah. And I think if we can start wiring our mindset and getting conscious that this is something we have to do. I can't say, well, if the boss is all right with it, why aren't you? I think that language probably may not work anymore.
So
Nice.
generational service orientation is becoming a big thing in organizations, all right? And that, how is generational service orientation becoming critical? So who am I servicing? So if the boss believes that he's not a boss, but if the boss believes that he's a service provider to the people who are supporting him in fulfilling the organizational purposes, and goes out of the way to provide his appreciation and services to the next generation of Z people, and the Z people likewise believe that their service orientation should stretch out to understanding what the bosses want and therefore servicing them to that requirement, that service intervention. Now, whilst we hope that it happens naturally, unfortunate observation in organizations are that they never happen naturally. Naturally, only conflicts happen. Programmed interventions are required to bring about what we call samanvaya, a common path to achieve the purpose of the organization, because both the generations are working for that purpose.
I think that's yes. And, I had read this some time ago also about organizations, about professionals, that if you can't have a service mindset, then work's not for you, because today we are all catering to somebody's need, and it's not necessarily just the top line or the bottom line of an organization. So I think
So
that's
you're right, Winnie, service orientation. But unfortunately, what happens is that in organizational context, when we talk, people tend to believe that service orientation is only for the customer
uh,
and the client,
yes.
versus the real-time situation and challenges that there is service orientation of each generation also towards the other generation, so that collective synergy drives the Samanvay to happiness of the organization.
It's a beautiful point. Absolutely. Uh, I want to know this about you. What's that stereotypical trait? So, which is a question I was coming to, that you find particularly admirable in each of these generations, and which ones do you find annoying?
So you require both of them, all right? Because if you don't require one, you better be rid of the other, because each generation working in your organization is a cost factor, right? So unless it is contributing to organization value, well, you don't need it if it is not required in your organization. It is not a museum that you can go and broadcast that we have multi-generational people if they're not pooling their might and strength to create value for the enterprise. So what we see, first of all, in the X and the Y generation of people is now contributing a lot to maturity, which is also required as you do business, a certain element of wisdom, a certain element of experience over a period of time, which is drawable. Remember that the experience of the people of the X and Y generation is important, but also not so important, because the experience is of a world which is not necessarily the world of today. So what are the lessons that they have taken, and how much of that is transferable to the new generation is very, very important. But that experience helps, because so many times most of the startups that we are seeing today are failing because they believe they have their own mind models by which they will work, and they collapse at a factor that they have not built an institution. If they had maturity and wisdom and guidance from someone more senior, that maturity and wisdom would have stopped them from making money and drifting away the money into unnecessary. That whenever there is requirement of empathy, whilst empathy conceptually is understood by the Z generation, when it comes to reflecting it in behaviors, their ability to reflect empathy in behavior is missing, for which the wiser counsel and help and guidance from a experienced generation would be really going a long way if the requirement is of empathy. And fourth is managing crisis and adversity, which only experience can teach you, which if the real experience is robust of a person working in your organization, then they have had experiences of handling those kinds of conflict organization, then they have had experiences of handling those kinds of conflicts. So your ability to handle new conflicts and adversities that may come in is much higher. To use technology-based tools which add to all of that. And the most important is their ability to link to the future generations of new technologies. So on the one hand, you will have the old and X and Y generation, which is immigrating into the new technology, which is just trying to learn the new technology to be able to survive. Versus the reality is that the growth and progress is going to take you to the higher and higher new levels of technologies, which the ability of a citizen of the technology who is the X generation person, his ability to link to the future generational technologies is far superior than that of an immigrant who's trying to learn the technology just for his survival. So
Nice. Adil, ever since I have known you, you've been a very senior professional. And yet, over the years, when you knew me, perhaps I think 13, 14 years ago, when you first got to...
I hope that is not a reference to my vintage.
It is not at all a reference to your nicely colored white hair, but but you've always been in a leadership role since I have known you, and that probably was 15 years ago. And even now, and I've had a journey, and you've seen that, when I started off, obviously, I was very raw in the corporate world compared to aviation and today. And I feel I've grown a lot, and I, of course, attribute a lot of my learnings to you. But you've managed to connect with me at every phase of my own growth, where I felt, yes, you were easy to talk to and I could learn from you. And that has also happened with my team members who've interacted with you, who've been from a different generation. So what I want to understand is, how do you keep yourself relevant where people feel they can connect with you, apart from your overpowering personality of seniority? Once you speak, it's immediate connection.
So Vinny, it's like this. Number one is, it is a matter of what your mindset is. Why is mindset very important? We have read many books and we have heard many leaders who keep talking about the criticality of mindset. Now, there are two kinds of mindset. One is a learning and an open mindset, and the other is a closed mindset. The closed mindset blocks you and tells you that you have succeeded, therefore what you are doing is right, and therefore the new people need to learn from you because you have been successful, and therefore you tend to reinforce exactly that what you have done. So when you see leaders telling people, do as I do, they are operating from a closed mindset. Closed mindset wants others to migrate into their style, but does not want them to migrate into the new style. Luckily for me, and I hope it is lucky, but I operate with an open learning mindset where I believe I have succeeded in a given context, but that was a context which I succeeded in. Now the context itself has shifted. Therefore, I need to change my equilibrium and get my equanimity with the new situation and context. And therefore, unless and until I operate with an open mind to learn from the new generation, I will become irrelevant, and therefore my relevance will go down if I do not learn from and speak to the new generation of people. I am therefore big time into reverse mentoring.
Amazing. So I'm sure that would have been a journey for you also then to kind of open the mindset to that possibility, because again, you were in a homogenous work culture earlier, I'm sure, when you started, to the way it's gone. What I want to understand is, what were some of the things that you had to let go, or some of the beliefs or reservations that you would have had that you had to let go to then have this mindset where now you're saying that you're a big believer in reverse mentoring, and that's again a very big deal. So was it natural, or was it work that you did to get here?
So number one, Vinny, there is a misconception, and as you rightly also put it, that misconception is to believe that multi-generational workforce is a new element. And the older generations used to work in a homogeneous environment, which is not true. When I was working and I was growing, I also had to work when I was a younger man, and I was once upon a time a younger man. In that younger state, I was working along with bosses who were far senior to me by many years, and therefore the generational gap in working style and behavioral models were different even at that point of time. What is different between them and now is that now, because as I was telling you, the generational cohorts are shrinking from 20 years to 15 years to 10 years to 7 years to 3 years, and may now become 1 year also, that is shrinking. So there were people from different age groups, but generations are not age groups. So even we used to have those generational gaps with our seniors. But the importance is an open mind, which you develop, a learning mindset, which tells you that if I have to succeed as a junior, working with a senior who was 40 years my elder, and in those days people never used to retire, you had to force them to retire. Well, at that point of time, I had to realize that if I don't understand them, if I don't understand what drives them, I don't understand what motivates them, I will not succeed in my role to be contributing in their teams. So it was open mindset that helped me to learn at that stage. It is open mindset that's helping me to learn in the new situation. So what is important is you need to evolve an open learning mindset.
Okay, interesting. So rather than feeling entitled that I've done my time of submitting to my bosses and my seniors who are from a different generation, you chose to. But I think that is interesting, because that's such a large discussion today. We often feel that many times the belief is, I've done my time, so you'll have to do the same journey as you go forward. But it's all changing, and it's changing very rapidly. So just to be cognizant of it can be such a big, can make such a big impact in the way people work with each other. But So I have one question. How does, to have an open mind and then to stay relevant, uh, in the pursuit of being relevant, how do you not alienate generations or people who are from the older generations? And how do they not feel that we're having to stretch ourselves a bit much?
Well, yes, there is a stretch. If people do not have mindset, it doesn't become easy. So no, haven't we heard of the stories of grandmothers communicating with their grandsons who are studying in overseas universities over laptop and over all kinds of talking tools, which they were not even exposed to? So of course, for them, there is a stretch also, but you have to create that need for them to stretch out and then give them reverse mentoring, give them experiences that over telephone, which you could only speak once in a while to your grandson in America in the good old days, you could now be speaking to him at his convenient hour every day, and that too on FaceTime without paying so much more money.
Interesting. So how does this pursuit of generational diversity affect meritocracy in an organization?
Certainly, it depends on what are the critical factors of merit. Merit is also merit based on what? Merit means what? It changes. So, merit is directly an ability to contribute to the purpose of the organization. Am I merit oriented to be able to drive to fulfill the purpose of the organization for which I'm part of that organization, right? Now, the question is, if the requirement is maturity, if the requirement is wisdom, if the requirement is empathy, then certainly it will be slided towards the generation X and Y. But certainly, if it is about speed, if merit to delivery of the purpose is linked to use of technology, new wave of thinking, e-commerce, and all of those elements, then certainly the merit will be defined differently. And if you cannot contribute to those parameters of merit which an organization defines, well, of course, it's going to cause problem.
Okay, so great. Okay, so my I'm not on mute. Great. So that means you're saying that it doesn't really impact. It depends on the need of the role and what's required. And if you carry that ability, then whichever generation you're from, it doesn't matter. And
You see, there is also a certain stereotyping happening.
yeah.
All right. And let me tell you a little story, a 2-minute story, if I can digress. Well, when I used to work in SR, I used to always write and I used to be present in media and I used to always love to write and things like that. At that point of time, my two very senior number twos, who were vice presidents and I was the president, used to come and tell me that if I continue to do the way I was doing, at some point of time, I was going to become irrelevant because my articles in newspapers at some point of time, print media was going to be non-entity. So I would lose my positioning. So they said that, well, you're going to soon lose your thing. And they were all present at that point of time on social media. Now, that was very critical. Content was very much my situation. I was much more a content creator in terms of the subject matter knowledge, but a technology was going to make me irrelevant, is what I heard them saying. Because they were all present those days on LinkedIn and Facebook and all of those kind of things, and I didn't know what to do. I certainly had to stretch out to understand how these technologies work, such that I adopted LinkedIn, I adopted Twitter, I adopted Facebook, and today I have more than 35,000 followers on LinkedIn, more than 5,000 followers on Facebook, and my dear friends are still somewhere around 10 or 15,000 followers. That matrix does not matter. What is critical is if the generation is willing to stretch out, and if it has got what it has got, then your ability to link to the technologies of the new world and be able to penetrate. I have more followers in the Z generation than my generation. And they will follow you if you do not have that stereotype belief that what they do, you can't do, or what you do, they can't. Everyone can do everything that everyone can do.
I relate to what you just said, because even the programs that we've done together for Lead the Future, our course, the modules that you have done have totally hit home. It's easy to understand, you break it down. It's not theoretical. At the same time, one can start imagining that, yes, you're talking about me. I think every person that perhaps sees the video feels that you're talking to them and about them. And I guess that's coming from what you just described, a certain this mindset where you are connecting and you're taking on board these suggestions also to understand what they would want, what would be relevant. Now, of course, this you said was senior, your subordinates, but they were themselves very senior. I want to know, how do you onboard an innovative or a disruptive suggestion from a relatively younger person? And how do you break down that hierarchical glass ceiling?
By just not bothering about the rank and the seniority of the person giving the suggestion. If you focus on what the suggestion is, and if you have the ability to see how the suggestion connects to making the purpose achievable or not achievable, that would be very good. So merely the age and other cohorts which are irrelevant to the suggestion made and its contribution to the purpose, by being oblivious of the other factors and focusing on the suggestion and its delivery, you will be able to adopt any idea which is a great idea coming from wherever.
I think that's interesting. Sometimes what also happens is senior people feel they need to cut out the noise. And they feel that when your subordinates or juniors are coming up with something that is not how it's done, then you feel that you'd rather cut out the noise before you even listen to it in totality or give it a thought or a consideration.
Surprisingly, the juniors wish that they need to cut out the dilutions and disruptions that the seniors bring on the table to the new world.
So I guess both parties need to, I think, start practicing a little bit more patient listening, and perhaps magic could be created there or found there. So how can we better?
Magic has to be created by organization. The magic has to be created by the organization through planned integrational interventions. That is very important.
Very interesting. So what could be some of those? Like, let's say if I had to say, what do you mean by these planned integrational interventions? No, so I'm saying, so when you say planned integrational interventions, could you give a couple of examples, what you mean by that?
So coaching is a very, very important thing in an organization, and particularly when there are multi-generational people working in an organization to fulfill the purpose of the organization. At that point of time, coaching becomes very important. And one of the critical roles of the coach is to observe the interaction, integration, and working of people across various generations when they are working together. So the coaching concept, which is a very outdated, old concept, is no longer true. We are now into the world of appreciative coaching. And in that appreciative coaching, the coach has a critical role to play by observing the integration and the behavioral patterns of the leaders as they mingle around with people from different generations, because that is very important. Because he is important because of his knowledge and experience, but he has also got to become relevant to be able to create value in the new setup. All right. Now, what is very important is that after you observe what is happening, and there cannot be a cookie cutter offering of these interventional programs, the coach has to design those integrational interventions suitable to the context and the organizational culture, and that is when it will work. So whilst the concept of integrational interventions are very, very important, what becomes an integrational intervention is what the coach diagnoses on the basis of his observations.
So Adil, that's about the leaders. I want to know, what can a person from Gen X or even Gen Y do to feel that they are heard and to also get heard effectively?
Hurt or heard? Because if you're not heard, you will
Hurt
get
is
hurt.
easy. Hurt is easy. I think nobody would attend the summit. They're like, we get hurt all the time. That's okay. We just don't get heard all the time.
No. Vinny, I'm consciously trying to say that because hearing is very, very important to ensure that people are not getting hurt. Hurt and heard are very, very important correlated terms. Therefore, it is very important that the younger generation and the older generation, before they are stereotyped into anything, just because the younger generation is wearing distressed jeans, it doesn't mean that the seniors stop listening to them because they are wearing earrings. And the question is, are you listening? are you listening at both the ends? And therefore, it is very important that both the groups need to be listening to each other. And if the senior is not listening, you could find multiple ways of meeting him at a private occasion, conveying to him that you are feeling hurt because you're not heard, and therefore to at least hear you out before the decision is taken, whether your suggestion and contributions are meaningful or not.
Okay, interesting. So can a manager of such a workforce be trained? And is there any specific training that they must go through? I did hear you say empathy a lot. I did hear you say relevance, reverse mentoring. Is there any other specific training that perhaps managers for different teams and departments can go through?
So see, the core is the open learning mindset. Now, wherever the coach or the manager identifies behaviors of a person on the basis of what he observes or what he sees as the interaction of his subordinate with his other associates, or what the other associates may come in their private moments and complain to him about the behavior of a certain person, he assimilates the pattern, and then now is a question of designing an entire program suitable to that individual on the basis of the observations made by the manager himself and by the other associates who complain about the behaviors of that manager, to be then able to assemble a program, to design a bespoke intervention and offer it to him. Because each individual is so different that common programs are just like water on the duck bank.
Okay, interesting. I think this has been a very, very insightful, rich discussion. I enjoyed it a lot. So as we've come towards the end of our interview, Adil, I have this quick rapid fire round I want to do. I want one line advice you'd like to give to each of the generations. So your advice for Gen X.
I will give a common advice, first of all, to everyone. Okay? Shift from alienation and natural exclusion to conscious inclusion for a happy world. All right. So what does it mean? Number one is that whenever there are conflicts, and if there are no programmed interventions made in an organization, conflict is a natural outcome. You cannot avoid a conflict in that situation. Therefore, when there is a conflict, there is a case for natural alienation and natural exclusion. There is alienation, and when there is